in conversation with Pierre Bouchard and Kara Tremain, and it's a Vital Psychedelic Conversation. So it means we're talking about topics that are really important, and we're including in the conversation students and alumni from our Vital course. And our Vital alumni today is Kara Tremain. So congrats on graduating last month. How's it going, Kara?
Great, thank you. Yeah, just a month ago finished.
Yeah, cohort 2. That was amazing, beautiful cohort. And Pierre, you are an awesome guy. I've been really appreciating your musical taste and your DJing of the 5th anniversary of Psychedelics today, our online party. So we've got loads to talk about. And you've taught with our Navigating Psychedelics course and our Ketamine for Trauma Treatment course as well. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So I want to say thank you for accepting the invitation. So you had not met each other until half an hour ago. We've been having a lovely chat in the green room. Lots around somatics. So that's going to be a big piece, I think, about what we're going to talk about. Before we jump in, maybe you can just say a wee bit about who you are, introduce yourselves. Pierre, do you want to let folks know a wee bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. I'm also a licensed minister. I've been working in the field for 12 years. I think 12 years. Yeah, 12 years. And I've spent a lot of my time training around somatics. I have a background in contemplative psychotherapy from Naropa University. So contemplative practice features largely in my work as well. And I'm Hakomi trained. I've done a number of other styles of somatic work over the years, and have been facilitating and working with psychedelics in one way or another for the last 9 years as well. So trained with MAPS. I've trained with other organizations, and I'm also one of the lead trainers for the Congregation for Sacred Practices, which has their version of the Vital facilitator training.
Awesome. Welcome, Pierre. Thank you. I didn't know you were a minister. That's awesome. Let's come back to that. That's fascinating. Yeah, Kara, welcome.
Thank you. I'm an ICF certified coach, and I'm a somatic practitioner. My training is in somatic experiencing, and I have been in this work for a few years now. And I had a 25-year career in healthcare marketing, had my own marketing firm, and I transitioned to coaching executives. And in that time, I found that a lot of them were bringing their traumas to the table, and the small amount of somatic training that I had wasn't quite enough. And so I sought out training in somatic experiencing so that I could address it from a body level, since I wasn't a psychotherapist. Although I am going back in the fall to Pacifica to get my master's in counseling psychology and go on to get my license.
Amazing. And how long is that going to be, that training?
It's a 2.5-year program. And then, of course, however long it takes to get the hours, as you know.
You love training, Kara.
I know. I get told that a lot. It feels like this is the educational time of my life. Last time I was in school was for my MBA at age 25. So it's been a little while.
Yeah, it's a good time to learn as well. There's a lot of good work to do and some awesome, new skills and merging of wisdom traditions as well. First question I want to ask you is, maybe Pierre, I'll ask you this one to start with as well, because this is a Vital Psychedelic Conversation we're having. We always like to ask folks, in your opinion, what do you think is one of the most important things that we should all be talking about right now when it comes to understanding psychedelics better?
Well, one of the things I really like to emphasize with my students is, when we say psychedelics, particularly when we're talking about them in a healing modality, that's such a vast body of work that could encompass so many different directions. And so something I really emphasize with my students is learning how to clock what's actually of service for people. And I like to think of this occurring on at least a 2-axis model. Really, there's 3 axes, but I'll speak briefly about what 2 axes of this look like, which is there's the personal psychological work. I like to think of this as sort of the x-axis, right? This is me. This is what happened to me. These are my wounds. This is how my parents were a little weird, and how I'm showing up in relationship because of it. And this is, really classically the realm of psychology, right? And so this is a wonderful area to do psychedelic work with, particularly with MDMA or lower doses of things like ketamine and mushrooms. And classically what Stan Grof would have called psycholytic. And so that's a wonderful body of work. And if we don't leave that, though, sort of the high point of the achievement of that is basically just being like a normal neurotic person. And so what we have to add to that is the y-axis, which I like to describe sort of the low side of that, directionally speaking, as sort of soul. This is Jung, this is archetypes, this is the collective unconscious. It's like, how do I know myself from a vaster place of collected wisdom? And then the high side of that being sort of spirit, right? This is, how do I learn to be a conduit through which the universe, life force, however you might say it, moves through, right? And that if you talk to people that are into psychedelics, mostly we're talking about the y-axis. Unless we're talking about MAPS and we're talking about MDMA, and then we're mostly just talking about the x-axis. And so to me, what's really important for people as they're growing into this as a psychedelic practitioner or just a psychedelic enthusiast is thinking, where on this do I tend to like to go and where do I spend less time? And is there maybe some work to do to be a bit more of an all-rounder, which is my bias, that we can be, and it's good for us to be sort of all-rounders in these different departments. And so I like, so for that, to me, that's being able to speak about that and know what we're working on and what maybe is ahead of us where we haven't spent so much time for ourselves and with the people we work with.
Awesome. Thank you, Pierre. And I think that helps us to have a more three-dimensional grasp of ourselves with those 2 axes together. Because I think we very easily can feel pretty flat and linear. Yeah, and that's a beautiful place for curiosity to live, isn't it? The way you were describing that. Awesome. Thank you. What's coming up for you, Kara, around that question?
I think having just gone through Vital and meeting so many different people and the conversations that we have all had together, gatekeeping comes up for me, just in terms of, and I don't even mean just, legally, politically. I'm talking about with each other. And I think there's a rush to be in this space, as we're seeing. And in that, there's a competitive nature. And so I'm just noticing that there's a lot of gatekeeping. And I find that to be the antithesis of what we're doing in this work, where we're talking about, being in community together and growing that way. And yet when it comes to everybody's different opinions, I feel like I've seen a lot of not a lot of kumbaya. There's been a lot of, therapists should be here and coaches should be here and body workers should be here and, shamans should be here. And I feel like if we start to segregate all of that and people trying to claim territory, we're really missing the point of the work that we're all coming here to do. And so I worry a little bit about that as we come to the space. So that's on my mind.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That is easy to be missed, that point around gatekeeping, and when we designed Vital, we wanted it to be open to folks who are medical,
Yeah.
clinical, credentialed, and not. And we have multidisciplinary disciplines and domains of knowledge and traditions. There's not just one answer to this. There is a piece around like gatekeeping, like what's the foundations like of scopes of practice and competence and
Yeah, for
ethics and
sure.
values.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's more, I see that as really, a lot of that as human. What kind of a human being are we? And are we grounded in our humanity and our kind of self-awareness and kind of right relationship? And that's very human. And there's professional aspects to it as well. Lovely. So I think a nice place to go next is the three of us are going to chat. We're going to be fluid and grounded in our bodies. I'm going to try and not look at my notes as little as possible, I promise. Because just before we pressed record, you both were talking when I went to the toilet. I heard you, and I came back, and you were saying, yeah, you both said the same thing after each other around having notes and being too much, thinking about what are we going to say and preparing too much kind of takes us out of our body. And when I heard that, I was like, God, that's the dilemma that I've got. Can I talk without looking at my notes, or will my mind freeze? Can I do a lecture without slides and a presentation, on PowerPoint, or will I be exposed as a fraud?
Right.
So, taking a deep breath and being grounded. Let's talk about being grounded in ourselves. What kinds of missions that we're on in life with the work that we're doing, how we frame our work, why particularly this work means so much to me individually. So Kara, for you particularly, you've got a really interesting story, professionally speaking, working in healthcare and marketing and management and being a coach and moving into the somatic and the psychedelic space. So I just really want to hear what has that life been like to live for you, how it's evolved over time, and particularly now coming from that perspective of being grounded in your mission and your authentic power. How's that been showing up for you throughout that evolution?
That's a good question. I would say that I could have used myself years ago in my career. Healthcare, despite the amazing things that it does for the world, has, I don't even know how to put it. It has a lot of toxicity. It can have toxic environments, I think is what I'm trying to say. And it was a hard environment to grow up. I love the work, but it was definitely a highly competitive, not particularly kind environment. And of course, there are many exceptions to that. And so when I left that career, it was a little bit of being done with the environment. And when I moved into coaching, I wanted to make a difference in terms of getting leaders to see what they're not seeing. And and what I found, and I said this in the beginning, is that people were unknowingly bringing their traumas to the table, or not even knowing that they were bringing their traumas to the table, and they're people pleasing, the results of their traumas. And well, there's two things I want to say about how I got into somatics. And I know that's not necessarily the question, but it feels like the transition is, I had it in my coach training. And my first response to somatics when we started doing some of the exercises was, what in the world is this? And I don't like this. And so I had a real resistance to it. And I think what's really served me is that because I experienced the resistance and not this openness, I understand what happens when people come to me and they have that resistance. And so I would say most of the people that I worked with were not embodied. I mean, to me, that they would see that as a spiritual, word even, and not something that's business related. Although I know that's changing. So that's why I decided to expand what I was doing in somatics. And in that process, it helped myself. It helped me. And what I would say too is another piece of why I decided to get into somatics was in the beginning of my psychedelic work personally. I had a ceremony that I spent 6 hours in the most excruciating physical space I to this day that I ever have. And it occurred to me 3/4 or 2/3 of the way in that it was just amplifying the state of my body all the time. And so, having had a little exposure to somatics and then realizing that I had this just real breakthrough for myself of understanding that a real understanding of the benefit of somatics and not just walking through some tools that I was given in coaching school, right? So, what I have found by bringing it into my practice is, well, it's nervous system work, and we can talk a little bit more about that later, the two of us or the three of us. But helping people really understand what's going through, what they're feeling, in their bodies, but specifically in their nervous systems, and how that creates certain responses in the work environment and really at home. Because anytime I have conversations with executives, it always goes from work to home because they all just blur. Yeah, and so once I help them start to see that they're not living in their bodies, that they're not even aware of how they're feeling and how that creates responses, that really has become the piece that changes everything for them.
Nice. So yeah, that somatic piece is foundational, in a sense, to being human, maybe. Yeah, opening up that self-knowledge in a way, and it's really interesting to think that trauma shows up, at home and at work, and it might not
Yeah.
explicitly look like trauma, and we might not know what that is or why we act that way, or have these patterns and at home and at work.
Yeah, and I would also add that, of course, not everybody relates to the word trauma, and so I always talk about it from a accumulated stress standpoint as well.
I just want to ask you a question, Kara, about Vital. What was your thoughts around that? So you already become a coach. What was it that Vital offered that kind of felt like the next step, kind of between coaching and somatics and
Oh, yeah, good question.
becoming a psychologist, doing that degree next?
I've actually been reflecting on that full year because so much happens in a year anyway. Um, what I said to Mike and Angie, who was my study group leaders, was that when I entered, there's a lot that we learned. I realized there was a lot that I had read quite a bit and had dived into this a lot. And so I feel like while the subject matter wasn't necessarily new, it really expanded my thoughts on it for sure. And it made me really comfortable about talking about this. Prior to Vital, I don't know that I would have necessarily done a podcast and had an open conversation about it. So, and the reason why I entered Vital was that I knew I wanted to do this work. And at least at the preparation and integration phase until things change legally in California. But that's why I entered Vital. And I would say that, well, there's so much. We could go on and on what Vital has done for me, but it's certainly impacted how I have conversations around preparation and integration. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, because when you spend a year doing this and you're in it every single week, and I'm also the person that took more than one elective, like I really immersed myself in it. It's hard to know, because it really became so much a part of me. Does that make sense? Like
Yes.
it's just kind of infused, and I feel all of us feel this way, so much different. And I think, if I'm being honest, there was a little bit of, gosh, do I need this training? And then when I was all done, I thought, oh, yeah, I needed this training.
I love it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kara. That's really cool to hear. Um, and I guess similarly, Pierre, for you, I know you've had a different pathway, but I'd love to hear about your evolution as a counselor, kind of what the genesis of was there, and maybe how it did it fit in originally with your experiences, with mindfulness and spiritual practices, and how's it evolved as you've worked with psychedelics, and maybe as another third question, working with a team, and you're building that practice in Colorado, and how does that feel, if that's okay to kind of combine all that into one question.
You may have to remind me about
Yeah.
several of the pieces as we go. But what David's referring to in that end is I run a group ketamine practice here in Boulder. Yeah, well, I guess I would say that my career has had a number of phases. I would say I came to studying psychotherapy from a family of Jungian practitioners, and so uh, the idea of the hero's journey and um, archetypes was something that we talked about as when I was a kid at the dinner table, which I didn't know was weird. So there's a way in which that kind of framing or that way of understanding something about life was there from a very young age. Um, my dad died really unexpectedly when I was a teen. Soon after that, I found Buddhist meditation, and as I found it because I needed it. I was an anxious, grieving teenager, and uh, the Buddhist meditation offered me something that I was really looking for in terms of learning how to quiet the mind and be with experience in a deep way, which was, yeah, very helpful. And I also hate framing mindfulness as like, this is helpful. I would say it was a deeply meaningful. Really, it was a path that helped me know myself and be in my life in a deeper way. That led me to graduate school at Naropa and studying contemplative psychotherapy, where we were then blending meditation practice with this wisdom tradition of the last 100 and some odd years of psychotherapy. And where do we find this intersection of I can pay attention to myself, and then there's also these young parts and wounded parts that are needing attention and needing healing and needing to be worked with. And while I was studying at Naropa, that's when I found somatic trauma therapy. I remember seeing a video of someone doing a session, and it was the craziest thing I'd seen in the world of psychotherapy. Someone was like on their side and they were curled up and shaking. And I thought, that looks really intense and cool. I want to go learn about that. And that opened the door into sort of the world of somatics, which I won't walk you through every pace of my career, but I think to say that what somatic started to open the door to when combined with a mindfulness practice was there's a whole universe of information and ways of knowing that don't have anything to do with your thoughts. There are ways of healing and ways of experiencing your own alive, beautiful fullness that don't have anything to do with your thoughts. And that has been the journey, I would say, since then. Or that clarified the journey, as did for me martial arts and more somatic meditation practices. I studied under Reggie Ray for a while. And so I would say that psychedelics came into the picture in terms of my work, and they always were, they were always connected to me. Like to be engaging in any kind of somatic practice is to be engaging in an emergent, unfolding experience in the moment with curiosity. And that's basically what I understand mindfulness to be. And this is a way of orienting that toward particularly the experience of the body. And so too are we doing the same in psychedelics, either when we are ourselves experiencing psychedelics or when we're sitting with somebody. Right? This is it's an emergent process where the more that we can get out of our rigid frames of reference for what this is supposed to be, or what we think should be happening, and just tune into with as much curiosity and openness as possible to what's actually happening now. And then from there, how can we begin to be a participant in that experience creatively? Right. So to me, this is where spirituality, psychedelics, trauma, nervous system, all of this, like they're all different facets of the jewel of our human experience.
That was beautifully expressed, Pierre. Thank you. I really love that, especially the piece around there's so much happening that doesn't involve our brain and our thought and the mind. And I think I had even contemplated somatics as still being filtered through my mind. But actually, yeah, now that I'm feeling into it, instead of thinking about it, yeah, that feels much better. I'm really directly feeling into the experience and then figuring out kind of where that goes next. And yeah, going next, there was another piece around your group practice, working with other folks and using ketamine in your space in Colorado. So what's that like, working with a bunch of other people, and how do you feel in that kind of role that you've got there?
Oh, I would say it's an emerging education, which has been really wonderful. I've had a clinical practice for over a decade, and to be, over these last years, moving more into mentorship and teaching has been just a really meaningful part of it. And that if I can try and shorten somebody else's learning curve a little bit, it's a joy to offer what I've come by in my own work. And I mean, I guess when you love and are obsessed about something, it's easy to want to keep talking about it, and like thus here we are, right? So in my group practice, I've got a handful of therapists who work with me, and that part of that is that they will receive 4 free ketamine sessions with me to just feel from the inside how I work. And then we do ongoing consultation. But I mean, I know this is very much true for me, but I would say I think it's true for many folks is, the quickest way to learn anything is to have an experience. That's kind of the basics of somatics to begin with. And I would say that if you want to learn how to do any kind of psychedelic facilitation well, you gotta be on the inside of it. And so it's been a joy to sort of get to do an arc of work with people, or at least have me get to sort of touch in with where they are in their process, and then for them to just get to feel like this is how this guy occurs in this space, and like these are my particular moves here. This is how I tend to work with music in these kind of circumstances. And so that way that just becomes something that they get to use as a reference from the inside for their particular flavor of brilliance, and for their humanity to then become the expression of how they were.
Beautiful. Sounds really fertile and creative, yeah, the environment that you've got there. And another question maybe for both of us, or of you to speak about, is where you live in the world. California, Colorado. So 2 amazing places, nature and obviously, but yeah, what's happening on the political side of things, and with both states doing lots of good work around decriminalization and regulation of plant medicines. Oregon's ahead. Colorado's Natural Medicine Health Act, is coming down the pipeline rapidly, and California's got I think a bill going through the Senate right now. So lots happening. I'm really curious. How could that affect your work, or have you thought about what you might want to do, and how you want to be part of this, and whether you want to advocate for anything in particular around how the laws are developed and how you can work as a practitioner, if and when those laws do get enacted.
Well, I can tell you it's a big reason why I'm going back to school to become a therapist, is that when we actually get here in California, we'll see if it happens anytime soon. Uh, Especially with watching what's going on with Oregon and Colorado. I mean, it's definitely not a perfect process, but that's why I'm going into wanting to become a therapist, is I don't want to be left out, because therapists are the ones that are going to be brought in first. I mean, I think that's what I think is going to happen in California anyway. So I'd be surprised if it was opened up, but we'll see. I could be wrong. They left it too broad when they put it through the first time, as I think they try to in each state. But yeah, that's my hope, is that when it passes, that I'm in that position. Otherwise, it's going to stay in the prep and integration phase for a while for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara. Yeah, where are your thoughts, Pierre, for the
Oh,
Colorado
geez.
reality?
Yeah. It feels like such a moving target. It feels kind of hard to land anywhere. I would say that honestly, I'm mostly focused on running my practice and my teaching career, and so there's a lot of ins and outs that I just don't feel like I'm particularly nuanced in my understanding of. Um, what I can tell you, what I'm seeing out here in the field, though, is that I'm seeing a lot of people start to claim publicly about doing work with mushrooms. That wasn't happening a year and a half ago. So there's at least there's a lot. Literally, people are advertising a lot more about doing ceremonial work in different ways, um, and right, there's no sort of standards of practice yet, so it's very much the Wild West out here. Um, I feel like I hear the horror stories, and then lots of really great stories of people having really good experiences in a whole matter of contexts. I'm excited that there are more practitioners getting trained up to do this kind of work, and uh, I want people trained to high standards, and I want people to really understand the risks involved in holding space for people. I think it's easy to be cavalier, it's easy to be naive, and so I always feel a little like, oh, there's a lot of people with a little bit of training going out into the world, and so I feel a nervousness about that. And what lives right next door to that, I would say, is the religious freedom side of this and the ceremonial side of this. I really believe psychedelics do not belong exclusively in the hands of a medical model and a pathology model. Although I'm 100% on board with that being a really useful Trojan horse for moving these substances, these medicines into the culture. I'm totally on board with the medical model being the Trojan horse that gets it to happen. But there's so much ceremonial potency. There's so much. There's so much that wants to happen outside of a therapeutic context in the world of psychedelics, and there's got to be a space for that to be done well, and for there to be good ethical standards.
I agree. I actually have a question for Pierre, like from previous, if it's okay. I was curious, and I didn't say much myself, but I'm curious what somatics has done for you, since you were talking about how you personally came to
Oh,
it.
That's a fun question. Yeah. I think a couple of years ago, I would have said something of like, well, when I was new at all this, one of the ways that I really learned somatics in a deep way was that I would say that a lot of that x-axis stuff got to get worked in a big way. Like I got to do a lot of trauma release. I got to uh, contact the wounded children inside of me, and that has been a huge part of it. I would say that um, for me, the cultivation and practice of somatics has really been really concurrent with a cultivation and practice with psychedelics, and I don't think I can really parse those two apart at this point. And so that I can point easily to, like, there have been things that have happened to me that we could describe as nervous system integration and healing. And at this point, I would also say that somatics to me is so much bigger than that. And that this is really about living a vibrant, full life. And that of course, has to happen in a body. And so that I would say that uh, what I what started as an avenue to try and resolve some trauma has become more of a spiritual path of embodied ecstasy. That's like, this is really about enjoying life from a bigger place, um, and getting, I feel like it's not even about wounds anymore. It's about energy. It's about learning how to conduct and hold and live with more energy in different ways. And so um, to me, psychedelics and somatics are just, they're both part of my spiritual practice, which are both part of my, it's just like I'm just healing by any means necessary, and
Yeah.
awakening by any means necessary. And so to me, it's all kind of one thing.
Yeah. Well put. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
agree.
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that. I'm thinking to somebody that I worked with recently who, until we started doing some work together, and it's actually not a formal relationship, it's a little bit more casual, which is very unique for me. And this person said that they were somewhat aware that they weren't in their body, which is a term that we talk about, right, in somatic work. And she was having a hard time learning to access it. She'd had a near-death experience many, many, many years ago, and hasn't had a lot of success in moving through some of the somatic pieces around it. And the entryway that we found was different than anything I've ever had, and it was through the heart. It was through love,
Mm-hmm.
and which is not something I necessarily do, because there's a lot of focus for me in my practice on the nervous system. Because generally when people come to me, they're pretty dysregulated. I get more people in a dysregulated space than I do people who were completely shut down, although that happens. But anyway, it was interesting. So when you talk about the vibrancy of life, I thought it was a really interesting, just very recently, that's it was for the first time for her. She was like, could feel love in an embodied way, not just the concept. And anyway, really, so I agree. It's definitely more than just nervous system work. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I love hearing about the different parts of being human, the different systems that we are made up of. Like, we have a body, we have a brain that never stops thinking, we have a heart that feels so much, we have memories, and yeah, maybe we have this soul spirit as well. And I think that's why psychedelics, for me as a social worker, they just open up a whole other way of healing and of just getting to know self and understanding the world and reality. And it's so wildly different to what I was taught in social work school, and the psychoanalytical training that I have, completely different. So how about for you two, what have you needed to maybe unlearn, but also what is it that you've truly learned about being human, and why it is with somatic practices that they are so effective for healing, and for, well, what are they for as well? It's not just for healing.
So I'm going to repeat the question back. So what have we had to unlearn and then learn around, and how have somatics been a part of that?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for sticking too many questions together.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure I'm answering. I was getting caught up in the questions before, so get out of my head and into my body. One thing that I work on a lot, a lot of my clients are women. I have men too, but a lot of them are women. And so for me, and something that I see in my practice a lot is boundary work. And once I approached boundaries, I mean, I have read a lot of books on boundaries, and it's work that I had to do for myself. And so, what somatics brought for me around boundary work was really feeling into where I cross my own boundaries, as well as where people cross my boundaries, and to feel it, to pay attention to where I feel it, like when I stop myself, because I can feel personally when I start to move into, being helpful, people pleasing, and to like stay with myself and feel into where I'm about to cross a boundary for myself, or where I'm allowing somebody to enter my space, whether it's, a simple thing, somebody asking me a question I don't want to answer, or somebody asking me to do something that I don't want to do, whatever it is. So I would say um, unlearning the way I learned about boundaries in the first place, which was in therapy, in talk therapy. But then to really understand myself at the body level it was like a big game changer. And so I feel like anything, I feel like the things that we teach well are the things that we've had to learn ourselves. And so I would say that's been a huge part of my work and my work with others.
Thank you, Kara. Yeah, how about for you, Pierre?
Oh boy. How much time do we have? Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting challenge with this, which is there's the things that I can point to that I know that have happened very clearly, and like Kara, I too have had to do some, and have had the pleasure of doing some boundary work, and love doing that with my clients. It's like, talk about a lever that if that gets integrated in a deep way, if it wasn't there online, if that gets integrated, how, like, that alone will change somebody's life in a dramatic way. So there's things like that that I can point to. Another one would be Chogyam Trungpa, the founder of Naropa University, used to like to talk about the natural dignity of the sitting posture and the natural dignity of a human being. And I would say that over the arc of my own psychedelic career, something that really started to come through over a period of years was something of my own inherent dignity. A somatic way of describing this would be sort of coming into the verticality of the spine, right? That there's a level of tension in the vertical dimension that we can hold in our own uprightness, right? This has to do with boundaries then too, where there's a sense of sovereignty within our being, that what can come toward us, we can deal with without having to close our hearts, right? That, like, we get to stay open and stay us no matter what's happening. I would say that is a somatic expression of what psychoanalysts might describe as ego strengths in some way, right? And so I think I've seen in myself somatically how a lot of this has come together and integrated over the years. Like, I'm just some 39-year-old jerk who's figuring it out like everybody else. So not that any of this is a complete project, but like, there are pieces that I can point to where I feel like a different person than I did 10 years ago. And that lives right next door to something that I think is a real interesting challenge of somatic work, is that we would describe it as a subcortical process. This is something that's occurring below conscious awareness. That really things are getting worked below the level of conscious awareness that really at the brainstem and midbrain level that only trickle up to our prefrontal cortex later on. And so there's lots of little things that I think happen over a period of time with somatics where you just find yourself operating a little differently. Like, oh, I normally would zig in this such situation, and now I'm zagging. And it's a lot harder to notice. I think it's a lot easier for your spouses or your close friends to notice those things. But maybe the shorthand for that is like, I think I'm a little bit less of an asshole. And like, I have a more open heart, and it's a little easier to be present. And I'm at this point, I would say, so like there's the trauma, the ego strength side of integration of somatics. And I say like, what I'm really enjoying personally in my own life around this a lot now is bringing more of that stability to my spiritual life. You know, that like, if people only do the y-axis work, they're only doing spiritual work, and they don't have much of a body, you can feel there's a sort of a brittleness to that as well. In the same way, there's a brittleness to only doing this personal level work. And so that where I think of somatics now is really actually, I'd say, more based around the chakras. And it's less about like, I'm not trying to solve a problem, but I'm more relating to different energy centers in different centers of consciousness inside myself. And this is just the frontier of my own life at this point, which is there's something about the third eye and the crown chakra that are opening that I'm getting to encounter. And that might sound very woo to some people. We're sort of outside of the hard science of nervous system talk. And I find to be practicing in ways that are, I'm getting to learn something about it. The expansion of consciousness through these particular centers is still very much a phenomenon that's occurring inside the body. And so there's a way in which all of what gets practiced and developed so that you can human well gets to be the stuff that you take with you into these other dimensions.
I don't think it's woo. You're speaking my language.
Yeah, Kara, anything you want to add to that in your own language? That's beautiful, Pierre. Thank you.
Oh, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, just to continue. Yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm feeling more embodied just having this conversation. I love that you're talking about getting to know ourselves better, or just kind of being different, less of an asshole, just doing things differently, like slightly more patience with the kids, you know, eating slightly less chocolate, you know, at nighttime. And just
I haven't gotten there yet, David.
right, yeah. Well, I'm very advanced, yeah. But yeah, just little things that kind of, I guess it's wisdom that comes out of us, or just experience, or just not lying to ourselves, whatever it is. But it just feels good, doesn't it? Just to know we're kind of doing something that's good for us, and that we know it's good for us, and we're kind of in alignment with that because we love ourselves, and we want to help other people be in alignment because maybe we love them too, and we want them to love themselves as well.
For sure. I think if I were to say anything off of that is, since you brought in the energy work that we don't talk about a lot. Actually, I was talking to Kyle about this, but Peter Levine just came out with his autobiography, and Peter Levine is the one who created somatic experiencing, and I'm more telling that for the people listening than the two of you. But and we've known in small conversations in training, not everybody's in this conversation, that a lot of somatic experiencing is energetic work. You know, he's pulled from, you know, from shamanic traditions and science. And so Peter worked really hard to make sure that there was a real scientific foundation so that it would be accepted, and also for the obvious reason, to prove that it works. But in his autobiography, he finally really addresses the fact that he has a big spiritual interest and background, and how that played a part in creating this. And so you, Pierre, bringing in, the energy piece, I'm guessing, just like me, that once you start to work with people at the body level, and I also have done training in craniosacral therapy, so a lot of this work is energetic, and we're feeling what we're in attunement, and we're feeling what's happening with the person in front of us. And a lot of this work is, you have to do the work yourself to understand what your body is at right now, what state it's in, so that you can recognize what shows up in front of you. And so what comes to mind, even, and then to expand that into psychedelics, when you're in a room. So doing this work has been more than just me understanding a group. I mean, when you're doing group work, it's more than just understanding where I am and how I'm showing up and what's happening to me in the moment. But it's also, I'll say the thing we don't talk about on podcasts. It's about understanding that the energy that you're feeling isn't necessarily yours, right? And so that's a big part of somatics that doesn't always get discussed. Would you agree, Pierre?
I would. Well, and I think, like you're saying, I think that I think somatics, the low side of pigeonholing somatics is that it's the nervous system. It, which is, I just think, a narrow. It's not wrong. It's just a narrow lens, which is that, right, and that what you're describing, right, is that it's right, in order to actually pick up what else might be in the field, you're having to use your body as a sensing apparatus.
Right, exactly. Yep, well said. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to ask you about. Recently, I've been hearing more and more and learning more and more, interested around the window of tolerance between hypoarousal, hyperarousal, and related to that, I think it's somatic experiencing terms, I think, of titration and pendulation. So you're just talking about the nervous system and energy. So when you think about this window of tolerance, and if one of you could explain that as well, what it is to folks, do you see that being nervous system? Do you see that being energy around this? What is it that we are actually experiencing somatically around the kind of hypo and hyperarousal?
You want to take that one, Pierre?
Yep.
Me or you? What I can tell you from the somatic experiencing standpoint is that's the point, is to get into your window of tolerance. We think a lot about somatic work as down regulation. I would say that's the perception of somatic work for people who haven't experienced it. And in the work that I do, it's really about being able to tolerate and be with all feelings and all emotions. And that does get you to, a place of equilibrium. But the whole point is to be able to handle what it is that comes up. And that's how I work with the window of tolerance. To me, I want to keep it that simple for people, because we can go into it. But just to explain, it's, as you were talking about, the hyperarousal, and so it's the place between sympathetic arousal and parasympathetic in terms of being shut down, and it's a place of, I'll say, equilibrium. And so it's really the goal of the work that we do.
And I'll add just a little bit to that here, where, one way of describing this is motility. It's the ability of the nervous system to move fluidly between those states. And that really so much of, somatic trauma work is built on helping the system become more motile. And that when we've experienced a lot of trauma, what happens is we might be in that little window of tolerance for a period of time, but the slightest thing happens and we either rocket up into muscular tension and anxiety, and panic, or we collapse, right? This is the low side, the hypoarousal, right? And that there's nothing wrong with either of those states. This is just mammalian architecture. But what we want to be able to do is move fluidly between those and in a dose responsive way to what's actually occurring in front of us, not based on the past. And so really what we're working on with people is that whether we're using the window of tolerance as the and pendulation as the method for doing this, or other ways too, what we're helping people do over time is sort of smooth out their nervous system so that it's capable of operating in that way.
And what about working with clients and kind of walking them through the attunement to this kind of inner world or to this experience of their window of tolerance? Like, how would you guide someone into that? Just being able to kind of slow things down and tune into it, and then what do I do with that? And how do I have more motility or expand my window of tolerance? So, maybe moving more practically, what are some techniques that you use with clients to help them first become more fluent, I suppose, in the language and finding that within them, and then kind of working with it in their own time?
Well, you could do a 3-year, as Kara is doing, an entire 3-year training to answer this question. So, well, I would say that, a common starting place for all of this is what is often described of as resourcing, right? It's an ability to, can you find something pleasant, either a memory or something in your present moment experience, or something imaginal, that you can recognize as pleasant, right? When people have a lot of trauma, they don't tend to live in a place that's pleasant. They tend to live in a place where the fire alarm's going off all the time. And so the first thing to learn how to do is how to participate with your experience in a way so that you can start to move that needle a little bit. And this is where, gentle breathing exercises come in. This is where yoga practices. I mean, there's like kind of if you search like heal your nervous system on YouTube, basically everything you find is practices that are designed to sort of move the needle a little bit in some way. And it's a gateway. That's a first step in all of this, right? In terms of what beyond that starts to help people integrate things, you have two very large categories we could talk about. One, which is event-based traumatic memory, and then more what we could describe as developmental, which is where there is no memory. This is broadly, you can say, right, there's the bad things that happened to you that shouldn't have, and then there's the good things that didn't, and so we start to get into a really vast universe of skillful means for how to work with this, which are probably far outside the purview of this podcast. But to say that this is what we're starting to talk about when we're talking about trauma therapy, right? Of things that are going to help somebody move towards something that's hard in a safe way, so that the nervous system can start to integrate it in a way where what was unmanageable is encountered in a manageable way. It's why we like psychedelics for this so much. And that as we do that, that memory gets re-encoded and stops triggering the smoke alarm so much. Kara, what would you add here?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind, to your point, it's a big question, but I think what comes to mind is SIBAM, which is a somatic experiencing approach to all this, which is sensation, image, behavior, affect, and meaning. And it's it's like foundational, like pendulation. It's how we approach. And you were talking about, entry. I think you said entry points. So sensation is everything. That's felt. So it's proprioception, as you were talking about prior to our call, and interoception, which is inside. So, and it's, the kinesthetic response, that's sensation. Imagery is not just images, but what you hear, what you smell, what you feel. Behavior is movement. Even just how I'm using my hands, how people talk, where their head is, going, while they're talking about something. Are they looking up? Are they looking down? Is their leg bouncing? Affect is, felt is emotion. It's the felt emotion. And then meaning is meaning making, which we all know. Each one of those is an entry. And so sometimes I'll pay attention to what somebody's stuck in, right? Most people are stuck in meaning making when they come to this work. But even as we go along, they might hold on to imagery, or they might be stuck following sensations in their body, and I have to bring them to another channel. We call them channels. So I think that's the thing that comes to me in terms of like a simple way to explain how do we get into it with a client and how do we work with them, is noticing what's coming up right now. So it may start in the beginning of sessions with meaning making, and then as they start to learn each of these channels, we work with them, or we work to move out of them if they're stuck.
Yeah, I love the idea of perhaps learning how to tune into more of our channels. So when I grew up in England as a young man, or as a boy, we had 4 channels. That's what we had, 3 and then 4. And then the 5th one came on when I was, a teenager. So we didn't have too many channels there. And now, wow, we've got so many, we have thousands of channels now. We have too many channels, so we need to kind of simplify it. But I feel like when we look at the channels we have within our own realms, it almost feels like everything has just merged into one. And sometimes by slowing it down, we get to differentiate between them and
Got it. Yeah.
maybe more consciously, skillfully, turn one down and turn one up, or have them meet each other for the first time, or get along a little bit better in how we kind of co-regulate our different channels and systems within. And I feel like psychedelics turn on all of those channels. That's why they are something special. They really, have this multi-channel approach that enables us to really go deep into what kind of unifies life and how to heal. So maybe, Pierre, could I ask you, with the work that you're doing in your practice in Colorado with ketamine, how does that work with this somatic approach? And what is it about the compound, the molecule of ketamine itself, that you find to be really helpful for working in a somatic way? And secondly, MDMA, how does it compare to that?
Yeah, well, let's also talk about psilocybin then too, in terms
Sure.
of all these things.
Let's do it.
Yeah. What they're all doing in their own ways is providing a vivid experience. And I think, as Kara just so beautifully described in SciBAM and in these different categories, is there are different ways of parsing out a moment of experience. And another way of describing that is consciousness expansion. If somebody is really locked in one of those dimensions, and they start to learn, oh, there's these other dimensions that I can be paying attention to, and they get more facile at doing so, that's already consciousness expansion. So we start adding medicine on top of that, and you have an amplified, intensified experience of some of those channels so that you can get to know them better. And so ketamine is one way that happens, and it very conveniently, for the last 6 years in my practice, that has been a legal way to do this. And so hallelujah, it's been a wonderful tool. It'll always be a wonderful tool, even when everything else is legal too. But it's a tool, and so that I think what's nice about ketamine for a lot of clients is that it dissociates so they don't have to. There's a way in which, for people that have a strong affinity toward the dissociative side of the spectrum, the hypoarousal side of the spectrum, it it takes care of that in their system for a period of time so that they can start to actually feel what else is happening. And so what's happening is that there's a more vivid experience for them to be encountering. That means they're feeling their emotions more. That means they're feeling the intensity inside their bodies more. It's it's counterintuitive because it's on a dissociative, but it's this meeting that part of them so that they don't have to keep holding on to that while they're on the medicine. Whereas MDMA seems to be working much more from that sort of heart opening place, like we were speaking earlier. Heart opening, and that's a real, it's doing a lot of other things too. Particularly reducing the amygdala, and there's sort of a rousing of energy and feeling more bonded. And that what that's doing is creating a context in which the force of goodness, we could say, is so amplified that it's easier to encounter the challenging places. And then there's also an amphetamine on board to pay close attention and be able to sustain your attention with what's happening. And so that's also a really helpful way of encountering a somatic experience, because there's a heightened sense of presence from which to explore the emerging experiences, often in the body, but in emotional territory, and otherwise. And it would be really, it's almost unfair to try and sort of summarize what any of these things are doing, because a lot of this, I would say, also has to do with, what our intentions are and what side of life are we hoping to learn more about. Again, back to the X and Y axis here. I've seen people do gorgeous spiritual work with MDMA. I've also seen people do really deep psycholytic interpersonal work with low doses of mushrooms, not high doses, but low doses. And I would say, generally speaking, those are often inverted in that it's easier to do sort of more of that personal level relative reality work with MDMA. And mushrooms, at least in part, can really lend themselves to beautiful y-axis work, which I like to think of less about in terms of thinking of the curriculum of somebody's unfolding and what's a safe way to approach some of these things. I don't tend to think about psilocybin being something they do early on, especially if they have a significant trauma history. So much of trauma work is about helping them release stored energy in the body. There's too much energy, right? There's too much energy and it's all jerky inside, and it's like there's no motility. It's up and down.
Yeah.
You release enough of that, though, and then it's really wonderful to bring all of that life force, all of that beauty, all of that intensity of the mushroom in, so that we're actually filling the body with aliveness and life force. But you have to have a conduit of being that can handle that.
Right. So beautiful, Pierre. So
thank
beautiful.
you. Yeah. And so that, there's a whole arc here. I often think of low dose ketamine, because I work low dose with ketamine. Ketamine, again, this is back to dose more than it is substance. I like to work low dose ketamine because I like people to be in it, and I've spoken about this before, but be in an open place where their sense of self is still online, where they're able to sort of do interpersonal work, they're able to feel their nervous system. You start upping those doses of ketamine, and time isn't such a meaningful construct, let alone having a body,
Right.
That's really powerful for a lot of other reasons, but it's not so great for trauma therapy in the way that I do it. I had something else to close on here and I've lost it. But generally speaking, I like to think of either low dose psycholytic style work or MDMA and ketamine work as sort of like we're zooming in. We're zooming in on the personality to find the wounded places, to do some integrating, to help the parts talk to each other, right? And I'm thinking of bigger doses of of mushrooms um, or ketamine in this instance. We could also be adding plenty of other things to this list as well as zoom out, right? And so again, we're kind of back to this notion of what actually is serving somebody. Sometimes it's about getting much closer in with the parts of us that we've pushed away. Sometimes it's about zooming out and remembering, oh my God, I'm an ape in cotton. I can't believe I'm doing this well. My childhood issues aren't such a big deal. Right. And so it's like, this is where this work we can't have a linear approach to this. This is so much about what's the unfolding curriculum of anybody's life. What's their sense of that? What's our sense of that? How might we support them in it? Healing the nervous system's part of it. And it's also so much bigger than that, luckily.
Thank you, Pierre. That was awesome to hear. I've got a minor question clarifying the route of administration for the ketamine low dose in particular, and any of some of the kind of dosing ranges as well.
Yeah. So, route of administration I work with in my practice is lozenges, because that's something the client gets their prescription that they are able to self-administer in my office, right? The truest answer I think you can give about anything with psychedelics is it depends. But I would say that very, very broadly speaking, that a low dose the typical range I work with was somewhere like between 75 milligram lozenge and 250. For some people, 250 will kick them into the stratosphere. And for others who have a particularly rigid cognitive structure, that's like they're in the room. I've had someone be on as much as 600 and still in the room. So it really depends on the personality structure of the person. But I would say that at this point, the way I tend to work with people the most is that we do 3-hour sessions, and then we'll do an initial dose and a booster, and that's either the same amount as the initial dose, so 100 and 100, and I do that at about 60 minutes post ingestion, and so that's or less, or they'll take less for the second one. And then so there's and then there's sort of a feeling out process over time with people of sort of what's their right amount to sort of get in the kind of window and sustain the kind of window that we're looking to do the kind of work that we've been talking more about today.
Yeah, I find that the lower dose work it's so fascinating to work in and to experience, because so much attention goes to the kind of maybe the more macho kind of heroic dosages, and that gets a lot of the press and the headlines, but it's actually it's kind of sweet spot, the more delicate.
Oh, yeah.
I think of it more like kind of sensual, particularly with ketamine. There's a kind of delicate sensuality that, like, we are falling back in love with ourselves, we're tuning back in, we're feeling things in a slightly different way, really aware and attuned to it. And it's great to have that just enough, so we can feel it and really be present with it. Because when we have those high dose experiences, it's kind of, often one might be just kind of holding on for bare life, and it is harder to kind of have that more, I think, nuanced and intimate conversation between parts.
There's also, when you do higher doses of MDMA and psilocybin, you can have a really hard body experience. It can be really tough on the body, and it completely takes away. So I'm in agreement. Less has been better for me, for sure.
I've got another topic I want to dive into, but before we dive, anything around somatics and psychedelics that you want to share that we haven't covered much yet? Because I know there's a lot there, and we're not going to cover it all today.
Sure. One thing that came up for me while you were talking, Pierre, was because I love your approach, how you describe what you do, and then it made me wonder. One of the things is a lot of times people will come to me because they've had a tough experience somatically, and they didn't understand it until they had the tough experience. So I rarely get somebody that says, I'm about to do this thing and I thought I'd come talk to you about somatics. And I mean, that would be the ideal thing. But as a therapist, you do get that opportunity. I'm not so much for me in coaching. And so I'm wondering how much work, and I'm interviewing you, but how much work you get to do on a somatic level so that when people go into this work with you,
Yeah.
because that's the ideal situation for me, is that I
Oh
get
yeah.
these people not when they've had a hard experience, but beforehand, so they don't have a hard experience.
Well, and I love this question, Kara. Thank you so much. Yeah. So much of what I think a hard experience is a situation that is somebody being in a situation that they don't know how to navigate well, and that it's sustained in being overwhelming, and a lot. And one of the ways that happens is dose, is having too much of whatever it was, right? And that for whatever reason, their psyche, their nervous system could not um, metabolize that much sensation. And so I would say that so much of so much of what I think the work really is about is actually being able to spend time with people and get where they're at, and so that we won't be putting them in a situation where that's more likely to occur. Until it's time to go for an, lean into ego dissolution territory where, yeah, it's going to feel like you're going to die, but that's part of this. So you're going to learn about that. I would say that it's easy to be like, just try and kick people through that. And certainly we see historically, there's been a lot of that. And so I guess it's to say that I'm a huge fan of it's better to overdo safety than overdo cavalier. It's better to overdo going slow than going too fast. People might be annoyed that you've gone too slow, but they won't be psychically chafed or psychotic
Right.
afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
So this is where, I mean, really, I think this is where, again, if someone's starting with you and they've done some work, some gentle time zooming out into the y-axis is wonderful. If they have a ton of trauma, no way am I going there with people. This is very much the style of work is dependent on the needs of the person, and
Yeah.
so so this is where and when I work with people, we're working together for at least a month before doing a journey, and usually the first journeys are about releasing trauma. They're about healing the wounded children. And so, again, right, there's like a phasic process to helping people move toward expanded states.
Yeah, really important to prepare the ground before you shake it deeply from its
Mhm.
foundations. Yeah,
Ideally.
yeah, thanks,
Right.
Kara.
That, if we're going to go, it's good to be here first. You have to be able to be here before you can really um, integrate what it is to go out in a big way. And then that way that we are, the more that we get to kind of encounter these little bottlenecks against our own expansion, like the more that we get to do that bit by bit into more and more openness, well, one, like that's where the wound is, right? If we could just receive the universal love of God and the universe, like we wouldn't need to do all this healing work, right? But it's like, however we were loved as children is how we're going to bottleneck around love in the medicine. However well we were loved or how well we weren't, right? And so as that we start to get confronted with that in the medicine, that's where our work is. And that's a wonderful thing not to blow past. That's a wonderful thing to get to each time we're getting to massage open and learn to receive a little bit more.
Hmm. I do have one thing I'd want to say more on somatics um, and psychedelics, and I think especially less so in ketamine, but especially in psilocybin, is a big part of somatic work is that you don't have to dive into the story of trauma, of your trauma, that is. And psilocybin, it's such a heady space, right? So I'm passionate about making it a little bit less heady and not trying to figure everything out in that space and trying to do a bit more somatically. Yeah, just I think it's really just more a thing to mention. I mean, if you have questions around it, but really just that's a piece I feel is important to mention, because a lot of times when we talk about psychedelics, there's so much about the story. And that's why I love somatics and psychedelics, is that it's okay, one, not to have to go through that story again, and two, not to even have to. So many people are trying to figure out what is that. They have this memory. It's not explicit. It's still implicit, and they know it's impacting them, and they really want to understand what it is. And you don't have to do that. And that to me is a huge, beautiful part of this work.
Thank you, Kara. I love that you mentioned that. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, sometimes those stories, it's easiest to yeah, not to have to rewrite them. Yeah, there's some beautiful stories that we hold in our bodies for sure, and I want to move the conversation towards music and sound. Why? Because behind you, Kara, are 10 sound bowls, um, and Pierre, I've heard you DJ, so I know that these are, yeah, realms of your work and passion, and that they mean something to you both. So I'd love to hear more, kind of why. And I'm just thinking about, yeah, how we've spoken about the body and energy, the nervous system, somatics, psychedelics. It feels to me like music and sound fit within those categories because they move between realms. Have this kind of spiritual power that is physical. Like we feel music, like literally we can feel bass, but there's frequencies and waves that move through our bodies. So I'd love to hear more about how sound and music kind of makes your life feel and how you bring it into your work around, say, psychedelics, or working with clients, or particularly helping with set and setting, and influencing the actual energy in the room working with someone. So again, that's 10 questions in one. Kara, maybe I'll just ask that to you. Like, where did all this sound and music piece come from originally, and how do you kind of work with that in your life and with clients?
Yeah, it came about because I experienced it in psychedelics, and the therapist that I was working with used them, and just blew my mind, and continues to blow my mind when I'm in that space and bowls are played. It is a very felt experience, and I've witnessed personally. Um, well, I can speak for somebody that I know pretty well, and I was a witness to them um, struggling with not having a lot of memories from childhood, and really just having just a real emotional reaction, like, why can't I remember even happy things? And after 45 minutes of bowls being played, that person was laughing, like laughing out loud, and then sharing story after story after story. And that was like I said, I mean, that was an immersion of sound. And I mean, it was sound with the psychedelic, of course, it's the combination. But I witnessing somebody get to have that brought back up for them. I'm not sure that would have happened with just the psychedelic. I'm convinced, having been there and seeing how that emerged in just this beautiful, playful, natural way, without it even being a part of the intention. It's something that's been on their heart for a long time, and then it came out. So I knew I had to have it in my life, and those are only some of them. So I'm a little addicted to them. I love them. I use them. I wish I used them more often. It's a whole thing. You have to take one down, set them up all the time. So sometimes I don't sit down and do it as much as I want, but yeah, to me, it's as healing as anything else. I'm also very much into tuning forks. I don't have those hanging out behind me, but so those two pieces and just working within the field as well has been something. I don't do a lot of stuff in person for clients. A lot of what I do is Zoom. But when I do work with clients in person, there's so much that's just moved through the body without any conversation. And, I can see it when people get up to leave and there's just like I don't know what just happened to me, but something moved through me. And it's wordless, and they'll just notice a shift in their life. It works almost similarly to somatics, in my opinion, just in a very subtle way.
Love it. Thank you. Yeah, I love that you said it's wordless as well. So without words, and I think that might be how it kind of can help us, because it goes to those places where, we don't need words, or where we kind of tend to block words to protect ourselves. So it goes right there. It's far out how you described that person's memories just kind of
oh
being,
my God.
It's almost like it's kind of like a key that goes into a lock, and that right frequency, that right note, bang, that's the key, and the door opens up.
We talk about, coherence and coherence in sound. And when you move move to a more coherent state, when things are flowing. And when things are flowing, magic happens.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks so much, Kara. Where are you on this musical sound journey, Pierre?
Oh boy, I'm utterly obsessed with collecting music for psychedelic support, and am obsessively thinking about it most of the time. I would say it's a vast universe in terms of what would be useful and good to play in psychedelic space. Like it's such a it depends answer, and at the very least, music becomes the substrate of consciousness for which consciousness moves through and with, in the psychedelic space. It becomes, the background is such an awful term, or it's such a minimizing term. That's like saying the atmosphere is the background of our life. It's like, yeah, no, it's also the thing keeping us alive and through which all things move. So it's that critical, in my opinion. And silence can be part of that too.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. But that, and I'm actually recording, I think, in 2 weeks with you guys for Vital, a thing on music. So I'll say a lot more, but music can support, can be a substrate that supports what's unfolding, and it can also be a support in helping what's unfolding. It can help guide what's unfolding, and in that way, one of the ways I like to think about music is that it's potentially helping people get something on the map of their consciousness that they didn't have. So it's a way of introducing new experience to the system.
That was very well explained. Beautiful. I love that. And maybe around how you utilize sound and music working with clients, Pierre. Like, do you typically have a couple of playlists, and you might feel into which one's the right one for today with a client? Would you work with a client to select that? Or do you actually kind of do any active moving and changing and adding of songs like during a session in response to what the client's going through?
Yeah. To me, it's important for me for the music to be an emergent unfolding to match their emergent unfolding. And so I am selecting music throughout that is in direct response to what they're going through, or at least what seems like is happening. And so that gets into a whole other universe of strategy that maybe I'll just mention, right, is that like there's a way of doing that that's like it's a background, or you're sort of film scoring it, which is like, oh, now they're feeling intense, let's play intense. Now they're feeling sad, let's play sad. So like that would be a way. Sometimes actually sort of counterpointing it. So when they're in something really painful, doing something gentle can be wonderful. And it goes on and on and on in terms of, you can play nothing but like exquisite, exalted music while someone's encountering deep pain. And that can also be a useful counterpoint experience. And sometimes matching them with the music has a painful quality to it is very, very useful. The most honest answer always, it depends, but that, and to say it's a massive playground. And I would say there was a paper that just came out. So these are not my words, but I just saw a paper came out about music. Some guys are starting to speak about this, but describing, the facility with music in a psychedelic space as a clinical skill. And I would really agree with that so strongly. It's a clinical skill to, just like anything else you would develop. And so being able to sort of move with, dance with your participant in a way that is responsive and engaging and supportive.
You took the words out of my mouth, but as you were saying this, I thought, man, this is a skill. This is a real skill that you have.
Yeah. And I would say too, that for all the new people out there, it's okay to work with a background playlist. It's okay to work with something simple. You can do that and people will have a beautiful journey. And that if that helps you stay present and in yourself so that you can respond to them more clearly, like, please do that. Don't fuss with Spotify, and that you can, and that I've known lots of people that didn't feel comfortable with this when they started, and that over a period of time, they really started to, and it became a fun and an expressive part of their own work with people. So it's really something I think people can grow into over time. What it requires of you is putting time in to listen to a lot of different things. And you can I would say that if you're wanting to do that, open up a Spotify account and only use it for medicine music so that you get the benefit of everything you listen to, creating more algorithms to send you more stuff. And that over time, try to develop the most omnivorous palette for music that you can, and just imagine what it might be like to encounter this in the medicine, and go test it out for yourself too.
Right.
Thank you, Pierre. I'm so happy you're teaching this skill in Vital. Kara, come back just for that one class.
I'm like, wait, you're teaching this?
Yeah.
I need to join.
I love the idea of being omnivores for music, and definitely, folks, go get that new playlist and selections of music up there. But make sure you get the paid version, not the free version, so you don't get adverts come up when you're doing medicine sessions. That is a nightmare. That's how I started off, just trying to save some money. I'm like, I can't do this. Okay. Before we go, we've been talking for an hour and a half. Thank you.
What?
Beautiful.
Oh my God.
There's so much more we didn't cover. So let's do it again. But this was awesome. Tell people about where they can find you online, and any other kind of upcoming happenings in your world that you'd like to tell folks about. Pierre, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Yeah, great. Well, you can find me on Instagram at pierre.bouchard.lpc. You can find me on my website, pierrebouchardcounseling.com. We're in the middle of a training for the Congregations for Sacred Practices. We'll be having another one in Boulder in 2026. And check us out. Check out the congregation. That's sacredpractices.org as well. You can sort of get a feel for what we're up to there. Yeah, I think those are the main ways. Oh, and you can find me on Spotify. Like, please steal all of my stuff. Check it out for yourself. See what you like that's in there. My name there is Pierre Rene Bouchard. You can search me and find my profile, and there's 200 playlists there.
Wow. Thank you.
I know what I'm doing when I get off. You can find me on my website at Kara Tremain, KaraTremain.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm still private on Instagram, so I haven't gone public yet. But you can find me in those two places. And in terms of what's coming up, I am going to be teaching one of Vital's electives along with Bonnie Jane Monson. We're both recent graduates of Vital, as we talked about in the beginning, and it's going to be on trauma and somatics.
Amazing. Yeah, so cool to have you both in our Vital world. And thanks for a really awesome Vital Psychedelic conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and yeah, just thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and thanks,
thank you.
Pierre.
Such a pleasure. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, thanks for listening, everyone.